All right. All right. Well, first of all, I want to say welcome to the latest of fit. What is this? The sixth in our series of butterfly identification workshops or presentations, whatever you want to call it. My name is Craig Hensley. I'm retired from TPWD, and I've been involved with butterflies for a long time, and decided I wanted to do some more teaching, so I offered this out, and we've had a pretty good reception about it. All of the other sessions have been recorded, as Robert said, and he'll send a link with all of those recordings. I want to thank the Alamo area chapter of Master Naturalists for allowing us to use their account on Zoom, which allowed us to talk for more than the 40 minutes that if you don't have a subscription to, you that's all you get. So that hopefully won't be a bad thing in terms of what all the stuff I have to share with you tonight. Hopefully everybody's hearing me okay. If you're not, put it in the chat, and Robert will try to troubleshoot that. I want to thank Jeanette and Robert for their help throughout this whole process, and hopefully everybody's getting something out of this that will help them become better butterfly chasers, and help with more surveys and things like that. So tonight we're going to do part one of our skipper trainings. This one we're going to focus on open-winged and tailed skippers. Then in July we'll wrap up with all the closed-wing skippers, or the majority of closed-wing skippers. This is a big group of mostly small butterflies. A lot of them look very similar. As a result of that, they are challenging to identify, but we're going to see if we can give you enough clues tonight to kind of help you out in the process. But with these butterflies in particular, a good field guide is going to be invaluable to you to help you with identifications. So keep that in mind when you're out helping with butterfly surveys. So we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, if we define skippers, which is in family, hang on here, I got to delete something here. I've always got to hide this bloody thing. I can't really do that, can I? Okay, let me hide that. Okay, I'm going to hide that. There we go. All right. The family Hesperiidae. Thank you for butchering that. They're anywhere between 3,650 species and 4,000 species globally. In the United States, anywhere between 275 and 280 species. There's always because it's always in flux in terms of who's who and whether these things are overlapping in terms of genetically or things like that. And with all the genetic work being done on them now, that's why we never seems to have a hard number of the exact number of species of a lot of these critters. But virtually all skippers have a hooked or bent tip to their antenna. And when I say virtually all, there are some skippers that don't have that, and there are some butterflies that do, and there are moth exceptions. So when we start trying to break these down into groups, we find that if we look at a global basis, there seems to always be an exception. But for our part, in our part of the country, you can count on the hooked tip or bent tip to their antenna to help you tell that is in fact a skipper. Skippers typically have thick muscular thoraxes that allow for their rapid takeoffs and flight. That's the reason they're called skippers. They're skipping around pretty quickly. There are 5 subfamilies that occur in North America. The giant skippers, a lot of these are associated with yuccas. There are the skipperlings, and there are skipperlings that are in this subfamily and skipperlings that aren't. There are the grass skippers. A lot of those are the folded wing skippers, and then there are the spread wing skippers. There is one subfamily that is comprised of only one species, the dull fire tip, which is that image that you see in the picture. You might get super lucky and see it at the tip of the Big Bend region in Texas. I photographed this in southeast Arizona. Beautiful, beautiful skipper. But if we get one of those here in this area, there's something really going on with the weather. Let's just say that. All right, so some reminders regarding skippers when it comes to identification. First of all, as I mentioned, many are similar in appearance. So even good looks at a skipper does not always guarantee you identification. And we tend, as I've said before, we have a tendency to want to put a name on everything. And sometimes we have to just say it's not, it's skipper spa. And we know and that's as good as we can do. And that's okay because these are very small butterflies, they're very fast moving butterflies. They wear out quickly, so their wings can be tattered. They can fade away as the number of scales falls off of them over time in their short adult lifetime. So just have to be aware of that positive ID is always a little bit challenging. One thing you can do that helps in your field guide is look at range maps. A lot of times similar species are often separated geographically, which of course then brings down the pool that you have to identify individual species. So that can help. So keep that in mind. Open wing skippers typically feed with their wings held open. Duh. And usually flat, but sometimes they'll, instead of being completely flat, they'll be halfway, which can be a little more of a trick to identify. So you want to keep that in mind. The tailed skippers, which we will cover a few tonight, they can, and you generally have very long tails, but they can be missing part or all of their tails, which makes ID a little bit more challenging. So that does happen over the lifetime of some of these butterflies. Closed wing skippers often perch with their hind wings held down flat and their forewings held up at an angle. That helps with identification because you're getting to see the underwings pretty well and the top of the wings, the dorsal and the ventral surfaces, especially of the forewings. The hind wings, you're only seeing the dorsal surface. So all of those sides can be valuable to aiding in your identification of the closed wing skippers. And then males and females of some species are different in pattern, so you want to be aware of sexual dimorphism because that can be confusing with some of the species that we have. So keep that in mind as well. I wanted to show these two slides again. These are from my Kaufman guide, just to kind of re-identify some of the terminology of butterfly identification. For example, here's the cell when you talk about skippers, especially, they'll talk about the cell or they'll talk about the end of the cell on the forewing. And that would be this region of the wing right there. So keep that in mind. And then when we talk, and then in the hind wing, which doesn't really get talked about that much in terms of identification, but that's the cell of the hind wing right there. It looks kind of like a thumb or like a mitten, a little bit of a mitten. And then we have all these other layers. I'm not going to cover them all because they don't all get covered. But the fringe can be very important in terms of identification of certain species based on color or pattern. And the pattern being the pattern between the dark and the light checks that you see along the fringe. Keep in mind, though, the fringe is usually the first part of them that wears away with as they get older. And when I say older, I mean maybe a week to 10 days older. A lot of butterflies don't live more than a couple of weeks because they're eaten by a lot of things and they just wear out. So the fringes can be very important on skippers to help with identification. And then you have these different bands. You've got the marginal band, which is the band just inside the fringe. Then you have a submarginal band, you have a post median and a median band. When we talk about a lot of these skippers, we're talking usually about the submarginal and the marginal bands, occasionally the post median, but not always. And you have the same thing in the forewings as well. So keep that in mind. And then every once in a while, they'll talk about a basal area, which is right at literally at the base of the forewing. I don't ever see that reference for the hind wing because a lot of times you can't see that when the wings are a certain way. And then again, you have a post-basal area, and then you have median, post-median, submarginal, marginal, fringe again. So that's on when the wings are open. When the wings are closed, you still have those bands. So you see again the fringe, you see the marginal band and the submarginal, the post-median, and then the median. And of course, this whole area right here is the hind wing. And keep that in mind a lot of times with brown skippers, it's hard to detect where the end of the leading edge of the hind wings is versus the body of the forewing. So kind of keep that area. or just kind of keep that in mind when you're taking a look at it. And this is again another thing to keep in mind, that this is why binoculars are really valuable when you're looking at butterflies. Um, we have a couple of butterfly folks that are pretty good at getting really close, but most people aren't able to do that. So without binoculars, so I would always encourage you to use binoculars, especially those that do close focus, or have it. And for those of you that can have a camera, pictures are, as they say, are often worth 1,000 words. So we're going to start with one of the easier, most more common open wing skippers, and probably one of the most easily identified ones because of the trailing edge or the fringe of the hind wings. And this, of course, is the funereal. That's how I say it, funereal dusky wing. Probably butcher the name. Other people might pronounce it differently. But the key characteristics of this fairly good-sized open wing skipper, of course, is the white fringe that you see that extends along the entirety of the hind wing edge. Notice it's very thick and it's very clean all the way. This upper margin is very clean all the way through. And every one of these, you can see that it's pretty obvious that you've got that white edge. So when you see that on one of these brown skippers, it's a pretty good bet that it's going to be a funereal dusky wing, although we'll talk about a couple of exceptions. Other characteristics that you can use when you get to the thought that it might be a different species with a white fringe. You're going to look at that little mark right there at the end of the cell. Again, this is the cell. You've got this patch right here, this little grayish, tannish patch. You can see it clearly here. Not so much here, but it's there. So you watch for that. And you can also see it right here as well. So this is an indication that this is a funereal as well. And I'll show you why when we compare it to others. And then finally, again, that's just the cell area. I just wanted to remind you of that. So this is the funereal. You notice that its host plant are legumes. So a lot of different kinds of legumes live around here. These guys will fly most of the year, so we can encounter them almost any month of the year. Their numbers ebb and flow because of different generations, but it is one of our more common one. Another thing, the last thing I want to say about this one, this guy's got the wings folded. You'll notice that the inside layer or edge of the white is very crisp all the way along the length, okay? Just like it is on the outer edge, it's the same way on the inner edge. Because we're now going to talk about this particular butterfly known as the mournful dusky wing. The mournful dusky wing is a butterfly of similar size, maybe a hint smaller. This is more commonly found to our west, although it has been found in our area, including San Antonio, including it in the park once or twice. It has the white fringe, as you can see here very clearly. But one of the things that is different is instead of having a pale area at the end of the cell, it's actually more brown, so it's not very distinct at all. So that can help you with aid with identification if you only get a look at it from the dorsal or the top side. If you're looking at it from the underside, this is what you're looking for right here. And we'll blow that up here so you can see it a little better. But one of the things you'll notice, it's got the white fringe here. It's a little more inconsistent. It doesn't quite extend always all the way out underneath. But what you see here is a little inner, the marginal band on the underside has white, and it's disconnected from the fringe, and it's a little more patchy. It's not solid. So this will help you with mournful. When I do a survey around here, I'm mostly going to find the funereal dusky wing. When I do a survey like tomorrow, this Thursday, when we go out towards Medina, I'm going to find that these are going to be far more common than the funereal, at least in my counts that I've participated in a little bit farther west of us. You can see this a little bit on the range map. The mournful dusky wing gets reported in iNaturalist, but not that heavily. But you'll notice it kind of trends a little bit more towards the west, whereas the funereal is found just about everywhere in the entire area. So both of them can occur on our surveys. That's why you really need to take a good close look at them. But by and large, the funereal is going to be the more common one. And just to compare them side by side, here again, you can see that patch on the forewing and the lack of that patch on the forewing here. On this one, you can look at these white dots, but they're really the little glassy spots, but they're really variable. So it's really not for these two butterflies, is not a great characteristic. You're really looking for the white here. And again, when you look at the white, look how the white extends from the inner edge of the trailing part of the hind wing all the way out to the tip of the hind wing, which you can't quite see it. And here you notice it kind of fades away towards the outer reaches of it. So a little bit of a difference there, a little bit different in wing size, shape, and pattern. Some of these butterflies, they'll say the wing tips are rounded. Um, uh, honestly, I can't tell unless it's really dramatic. On it's so subtle on a lot of these that to me doesn't seem to be a very good characteristic. But that's just me. Here's that close up of the forewing. Again, you can see the color difference here and here, pretty obvious. And then again on the underside, compare the two here. Solid white fringe. This has got a not quite solid white fringe, and it's got that little marginal band of white scattered along that leading edge or that trailing edge as well. So again, two different characteristics that will help you identify or separate these two species. But again, even though the funereal is more common, it's always worth checking and looking carefully, getting photographs documenting. This one may be underreported because it's easy to have the assumption that you see one funereal, then they all must be funereal. So we have to be a little careful there. It's a good reminder to again take a good look. There is one more white fringed um, butterfly, open wing skipper, and that is the coyote cloudy wing. This one is very brown. Notice how pale brown it is. It also has much larger glassy spots, and they're more rectangular. The white fringe is right here. It's not quite as dramatic on a paler butterfly. You'll notice there are records here. Back in October of 2022, Rich Kostecki, well-known naturalist here in the state and a great mother and butterfly person, I actually photographed one in Guadalupe River State Park, so that's pretty interesting. But again, this is one that you're not going to generally find in our area, but it is worth keeping an eye open for it, especially if you're doing surveys in the San Antonio area. You just never know. This was notice I said this was found in October. This is probably one that came north, and the reason I say that is its host plant is Texas ebony. Texas ebony's natural range is down here and far in the Rio Grande Valley for the most part, and not in this area. So this is probably a butterfly, like quite a few butterflies do in the fall. They strayed north and made it into this area. So uh, something to keep in mind. And here are all three species compared side by side. Again, you can see this clearly different markings on this coyote cloudy wing. And then the mournful versus the funereal again. So that is the white fringed open wing skippers that we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to move now on to a couple that are can be really tricky. They're brown, basically brown dusky wings. One is the Horace's dusky wing. This is a dusky wing that actually is probably of the two we're going to compare far more common. And this is a butterfly that's going to range from spring through fall. In fact, can be seen nearly year round. It has kind of prominent, if you notice the male here versus the female here. Female is pretty easy to identify because it has such a more dramatic pattern. The spots, the whitish spots or glassy spots are much larger, more prominent. There's more of a prominent pattern that you see, especially in the forewing, as compared to the forewing of the male. And again, another thing to look at, here's variation. These are both females, but look at the difference in color. This is a fresh butterfly. This is a tattered and worn. You can see part of a wing missing here, some wing edging missing here. So you can see that there's going to be age variation as well as male-female variation in these butterflies. But this is generally kind of a dark brown butterfly, has these little glassy spots or white spots that are helpful in identifying this one. But then we're going to show you the juveniles, and we're going to compare these two side by side, so bear with me. But on the juveniles, if you looked at this, it looks a little bit similar to what we just saw. The male, on the other hand, does look a little bit different. It seems to have those, at least when it's fresh, has those like tooth mark or teeth markings all along the forewing, a little bit more gray, a little bit paler. The one characteristic that you almost never see on this butterfly, the juveniles, are the two wings, little white dots on the underside, actually here and here, on the underside of the hind wing. Here's where the hind wing is, right here. The other butterfly, the previous one, the Horaceus, doesn't have those. I just was in Minnesota. I took this picture of a juvenile's dusky wing because amazingly enough, all of these guys that I photographed, I've never gotten a Horace's dusky wing very well to show whether it has the white spots, and I've never, or doesn't have white spots. And I, until this trip to Minnesota, I'd never photographed a juveniles that showed the white dots. Again, they're not super prominent, but it's something that's secondary characteristic to look for if you're having trouble identifying a juveniles from a Horace's. The other thing I'll tell you is the juveniles, most of our records for this area are in February, some in February, mostly in March in iNaturalist. This is generally considered a one generation butterfly, so it's a spring flyer. Although if you look in iNaturalist, there are a few records from August, September, so there may be a few that actually emerge in the fall. I'm guessing that might be a temperature rain thing. I don't know for sure, of course, but something to think about. So generally, once we get past March, the juveniles kind of drop out, and it's the Horaces that we're going to see primarily, at least based on iNaturalist records. So if we throw the two together, here's the female comparison between a Horace's and the juveniles. Again, big glassy spots that you see on the Horace's forewing. You also have that here in the juveniles. But what's interesting, it seems like they're more, even more of these glassy wings on the juveniles, and it almost looks like a complete line of them all the way through the wing. Whereas here you have a patch here and you have a patch here, so not quite as numerous. You'll notice there's a lot more white up here, right after the cell right here, the forewing cell. You can see this whitish, very almost white, but close to white patch right there. Just a little bit more spectacular in pattern in terms of the juveniles versus the Horaces. When we look at the male comparison, again here, this is more of a solid brown butterfly with a few glassy spots, whereas the juveniles is going to have this more tooth-like, shark-like pattern on the outer edges or outer part of the forewing, a little bit more gray to it, so a little bit less dark. So they're kind of easy to tell, but you still have to work at it a little bit. And again, photographs are mighty helpful when you come to identifying these two guys. And then finally, the closed winged, I did get one picture of a Horace's with the wings folded. And notice there are no indications of spots in here, where again, with the juveniles, you have this spot and a spot right there, even though they don't stand out super well. Still should be identifiable. Now we're going to move to another brownish to dark brown, almost blackish open wing skipper, and that is the northern cloudy wing. This is a butterfly that will fly again most of the year, similar to the Horace's dusky wing. We're going to compare those two here in just a slide or two, just so you can say you did. But this is one that has, especially in the spring, has a really fast flight. It perches on the ground a lot, so don't be surprised if you see this little dark skipper go shooting by you and then all of a sudden land on the ground with its wings half closed. That likely may be a northern cloudy wing. It does have the glassy spots that you see here. It's got this little row right here that's pretty characteristic. Notice it's a very straight line of 4 spots generally. But it is variable. If you look at this one, This one, it kind of flares out a little bit, and also the spot patterning is a little bit different in terms of size, things like that. So keep that in mind when you're looking at northern cloudy wings. Again, there's a lot of variation, but you don't see any pattern in the wings around those spots like you did with female and the female of the previous two and the male of the juveniles. The other thing that you'll get around here, we're kind of lucky on this. If you go too much farther east, this characteristic probably drops out. But you'll notice when the wings are folded on this butterfly, some of them will have this grayish, huge grayish patch on the underside of the hind wing, and it even extends into the outer reaches of the forewing. That is diagnostic for this butterfly if you're lucky enough to see this form. The farther west you go, the more common it becomes. So you're not always going to see that. But when you do around here, you can pretty much rely on that being a northern cloudy wing. All right. Then we move to a comparison. I want to compare the Horace's dusky wing with the northern cloudy wing. Again, a lot of similarities, but you'll notice that one thing that I kind of watch for is this guy's spots, the glassy spots are usually round, whereas these can be a variety of different shapes, triangular or other shapes, right, almost rectangular. Notice also here, this has a kind of a secondary band right here with this one. This one will have this band here, but it only usually has a spot or maybe a spot and a half in here. So a little bit different pattern there. This one tends to have a little bit more blotchiness to it. Here's a little dark brown blotch, some here as well. This is kind of a worn male, it looks like to me. So again, you can kind of see there's some similarities, so you have to be careful when you look at these butterflies, especially because they overlap so much in terms of their flight times. One other one, a brown one that we're going to look at is this guy, the confused cloudy wing. You'll notice on the map from iNaturalist, there are a handful of sightings around our area, mostly to the east of I-35, but there have been a couple of records around here. The Bernie area, I photographed one at Guadalupe before. One of the characteristics of this one, and they call it confused cloudy wing for a reason, because when you compare it to a northern cloudy wing, there's a lot of confusion as to which one it is. Some of the characteristics they talk about is that this one lacks any white up here on the tip of the antenna, but I kind of see a little bit of grayish area right there. However, one of the characteristics that I look for is this batch of cells right here. And I'll show it to you up close, but this one, instead of being a straight line, kind of bends out towards the tip of the wing. So something to keep watch for. I also look at these spot patterns here because these are usually bigger glassy spots, and this one almost has an hourglass design that I've noticed on the few that I've ever seen. It seems to be fairly consistent. Their face tends to be a little grayer than the northern cloudy wing, but again, you got to get a pretty good close look at that with a little bit more white around the eye. So if we compare the two, again, look at the pattern here, a little bit different but similar enough to be confusing. Again, you can kind of see this top of his head's a little grayer. This is a more of a dark brown cloudy wing. This one's going to be more to the east. This one's going to be more in our area. Again, spot patterning is kind of is something to watch for. But the real thing is to notice this. This is that string of 4 white dots or glassy spots. This one kind of forms a straight line, although there can be variation. Whereas this one formed kind of bends out towards the tip of the wing, as I mentioned earlier. So that is a characteristic that can be helpful to separate these two sometimes confusing cloudy wings. So keep that in mind. So that's gonna wrap up the typical small brown open wing skippers that we have that have variable patterning. You saw some with some sexual dimorphism. Saw differences in the shapes of the glassy spots and where they're located. Those kinds of things. Those are all challenges to identify this small group of butterflies. Unfortunately, it's a small enough group that it is manageable. I'm going to go to a couple of small butterflies that probably are undercounted in our area. And I say that because they're so tiny and they're very weak flyers by comparison to a lot of our skippers. So they fly very close to the ground, and it's very easy to overlook them. And so, as a result of that, I suspect that they are underrepresented in a lot of our butterfly surveys. Their host plants are mallows. There are multiple species of mallow in our area, so that shouldn't be a limiting factor in their ability to reproduce here. I want to thank Darlene Varga for this unbelievably gorgeous photograph of a common streaky skipper. If you'll notice, it has these little white markings. Some of them are different shapes. Here's one that looks like a comma or claws almost. To me, this reminds me of little claws. But these patches of black and gray, almost whitish, and then the beautiful brown here, the beautiful contrast between the fringe and the marginal and submarginal parts of the wings of both wings. Really spectacular photograph. I'm a little jealous of that one, just to be honest. Well done there, Darlene. And then this is a Texas powdered skipper. This one is not as dramatic, about the same size though, but not as dramatic. It does have a hint of a white bar that extends through the forewing here and over here, but this is, I think, kind of an old one. You'll notice some wing pieces missing. Again, very small, kind of, well, powdery, I guess you could say. It's kind of not any real distinct patterning like you see on the common streaky. So I will say that I'm doing a count at a park in San Antonio tomorrow for a NABA count. And last year we actually had one of these that we didn't get a picture for because it disappeared when it was such a surprise when it popped up. So again, when you're doing these butterfly surveys this summer, really go slow enough, especially check things like frog fruit and other small flowering plants to see if we might actually document more powdered skippers and streaky skippers. All right, now let's get real interesting here. So now we're going to talk about the checkered skippers. Um, Field guides, Glassberg's and Kaufman's guides currently show 8 species of checkered skippers. Recent research, and I've referenced Zhang's paper, et al.'s paper in 2022, they are suggesting that there's only 7 species, and you have to read that article. You can find it online. It's pretty easy to find. He's doing that team is doing a lot of work on the genetics of these groups of butterflies and finding out some interesting things. That's roughly the same team of researchers that separated the giant swallowtail into the western and the eastern giant swallowtail within the last few years. And of course, we fall right in the zone of transition. When it comes to the white checkered skipper and the common checkered skipper, those are the two that are kind of lumped together as a complex. It's thought that most of ours are probably white checkered skippers, but here's the thing. They're proposing that the white checkered skipper is actually a subspecies. This is based on genetics of the common checkered skipper, but we can't go there because we can't genetically test the butterflies we see. So really, and you really have to dissect them and do a genetic test to know which one is which because they do overlap, and that's why they're considering it possibly a subspecies of that. So when the new butterfly guides come out, whenever they do, be interesting to see how they treat this particular butterfly. Make sure that if you can take pictures of these these white skippers that you or checkered skippers that you do so, because there are characteristics that separate them, but they're small characteristics. It requires a good look. You can't just assume that you see a checkered skipper and you call it one or the other. You need to carefully look at it. And so we're going to spend a little time on these on 3 of these skippers that are in our area. So hang on tight. I will say that fortunately, again, Darlene shared this link with me. Dr. Zach Tonzitich, I always say his name wrong. I apologize for that, doctor. Really good expert on a good guy on butterfly identification. Wrote this in iNaturalist. This is the link to it. On identifying checkered skippers in Central Texas. It's actually really good. Some of the characteristics, when you look at it, that you're gonna see that he talks about are really fine characteristics. So I'm not going to focus on those I'm going to focus on the ones that give us the best chance of having a positive ID. But just knowing that there's overlap in terms of those characteristics, and some of these you can't identify down to a species. So let's start with the common / white checkered skipper. This is one that is going to be largely, most of the year, is our most common species in almost any survey I've ever done. They're quite common, thus the name maybe. A couple of characteristics that they have that help separate them. The biggest thing is right here on the corner, the tip of the forewing. What you'll notice is that there's a white spot here, a white spot here, a white spot here, and barely or not at all a white spot right there. So instead of being a square of 4 white spots, you generally have only 3. The second characteristic to look for is the combination of color pattern along the fringe here in the forewing. And you can see it on this one as well. What I look for, once I've seen that there's really not a spot here, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the width of the black fringe patch to the white fringe patch. And notice on all of these, on both wings, the white is wider than the black fringe, parts of the fringe, okay? And that's very characteristic of the common / white checkered skipper. All of these other spot patterns, he'll refer to some spot patterns here. He'll refer to some characteristics up here. You know, that's a lot of different things to look at to try to identify a butterfly that may only be on the ground for a few seconds. So first look for this, and then look for this these two characteristics right here. Again, lack of a white spot, a prominent white spot in this outer corner of the forewing, and then the white fringe checks being wider side to side than the black ones on the common / white checkered skipper. Then we have the desert checkered skipper. Now, the characteristics that you're going to look for here are pretty obvious right off the bat. You've got, instead of this lacking a spot, you'll notice a very prominent white spot here. So you've got a square of 4 spots on both of these specimens here. The next thing to look for again is the fringe. And on the fringe, the width of the black fringe patch and the white fringe patch are almost equal. So you can see that there's a lot more black in these wing fringes than there was in the previous species. And we will compare them side by side. So bear with us on that particular characteristic. The desert checkered skipper can be pretty common here. So you'll want to check these against the others. I will say that the underwing patterns of these butterflies can help identification, but most of the time on these butterflies, the reality of these butterflies is that most of the time when they perch, they're perching with their wings wide open. So you're not seeing the underside, which makes identification tricky. And then finally, we have the tropical checkered skipper. This is one that has a white spot in the corner. You can see that there. So this also has a square of 4 white dots here. But the secondary characteristic that you're going to look for, so again, when you ascertain this, then you know you're down to 2 species, desert versus tropical. But then the thing to look for when you look at the fringe, notice how the black fringe markings have kind of coalesced into a patch. There might be a hint of white here, but there's a definite patch of black or dark brown fringe on both of these photographs here, male and female, by the way. But that will help you tell that you have a tropical. Some years we don't get many tropicals. Other years we get a lot of tropicals. But this one may be the easiest one to identify because of the melding of the fringe here, the dark patches of the fringe into a wider stretch. Now let's take a look at all 3 of them together. So we have the desert checkered here. Again, when you look at it, you're going to see that the black fringe patch and the white fringe patch are almost equidistant width-wise. Here's the prominent 4 spots. Down here with the tropical, again, 4 spots, but these have merged together. These black check marks have merged together. And then with the common, again, we're mostly missing a white dot there. And the white checks are wider than the black checks. And just to reinforce that even more, here's an even closer look. So again, black checks equal the white checks for the most part on the desert checkered, the tropical checkered, the merged dark checking here towards the tip of the forewing, and here again with the common / white checkered skipper, more white than black on that fringe right there. Okay, so hopefully I beat this into your head enough that that will help you to actually identify them. And again, two species with the fourth white spot and the one species / two species with a lack of a clear definitive white spot, even though there might be a little faded spot right there, a pale spot. Okay. All right. Hopefully that will help. I'm hoping. Now, the butterflies we just now talked about are the most common ones we're going to encounter in our surveys, and certainly at Guadalupe River State Park, but then also in the San Antonio area. That said, there are a number of other species that I wanted to share with you today, because especially in the fall, these species may enter into our scene when we're out doing surveys, because again, as I mentioned before, in the fall, we tend to get some immigration from the Rio Grande Valley of some of these butterflies that typically are down there. But when you look at a range map, it'll show down in the valley, but then it'll have a checkered mark, a checkered line north of that, because these will extend north. And so we're going to take a look at some of these uncommon to rare possibilities, because I've encountered almost all of them at Guadalupe, or at least in the Bernie, Kendall, Comal area, and certainly they've been seen in Bexar County and some of the other counties. First one I want to talk about is the white patch skipper briefly. This is a small butterfly. The white patch is a good name for it because it has clear white patches on the forewing and a big white patch on the hind wing. Notice the way the wings are folded. That's often they're kind of cupped, and that's how you'll often see these little guys. They're small, strong flyers. You want to watch for them, especially in the fall, because outwardly, if you just took a quick glance, you go, oh, that's a checkered skipper. But when you really look at it, you go, oh, no, that's not a checkered skipper. Okay. So keep that in mind as we go through. You can see that there are some identification or confirmations on iNaturalist north of the San Antonio area and a few in the San Antonio area. So it's not impossible to get these guys. I will say Barbados cherry is their primary host plant here in Texas. That is not a native plant. So it's going to be restricted in its range as to where those plants are, unless it's more flexible than we know. But the thought is it's Barbados cherry. But a beautiful little tiny butterfly. I've seen this in our area maybe twice in all the years I've been living in this area. Another one that occasionally will come up. Notice the I-35 corridor seems to pick them up. You get them in San Antonio. We've had these at Guadalupe River State Park. We had one exceptional year where it seemed like we had all kinds of Rio Grande butterflies showing up, including this guy. And this is the Laviana white skipper. Beautiful little whitish butterfly, a lot of big patch of white on all the wings with black tips with some modeling of gray and white there. The thing that these guys will feed equally with their wings open and equally with their wings folded. So sometimes it's going to look like a closed wing skipper. Other times it's going to look like an open wing skipper. One of the characteristics of this butterfly that I like to watch for when the wings are folded is that right here, and this is not as prominent as I'd like to have it, but it kind of comes up, and if you follow, hopefully you can see my cursor. It kind of makes, I always think of this, those, what was that game you threw those jarts that you could almost kill somebody with? Those when we were kids, you'd throw them, and it was a yard game. To me, it kind of reminds me of that. It almost looks like two little wings right here, and then the pointed edge of the dart is down here. So something to keep in mind on this particular species. But again, not common in our area, but documented. So again, especially in the fall, watch out for these little guys right here. Generally, it is going to be September, November, few in October, January through December. They're mostly going to be, it's actually been seen 84 times on iNaturalist in our area throughout the year, but most of them have been in the fall. Okay. Then we're going to have the white striped long tail. This is a beautiful, striking butterfly. you'll notice there's actually a lot of records, especially in San Antonio. When you start getting north of Highway 46, they tend to start dropping out. This is common enough. A lot of you may have seen these if you've done butterflies in San Antonio area. I've recorded it 3 times at Guadalupe River State Park. These are 2 of those times right there and there. Actually, no, this one's down in the Rio Grande Valley, but this was the first one I ever had at Guadalupe on the spiny aster. But a really significant, prominent white stripe on the hind wing, really long tail if the tail hasn't been chewed off or bitten off or broken off. But a striking butterfly that we might see in the fall in particular. You can't really mistake a white striped longtail. So again, worth keeping an eye open for, especially the later we go into the season for surveying butterflies. Then I'm going to show you 3 butterflies that are generally brown with brown streaks and sometimes having white glassy marks and sometimes not. First one we'll start with is the long-tailed skipper. Again, you can see records in the San Antonio area, all the way out to Canyon Lake, all the way up into the Austin area. So it can be seen in the area, not ever common. It can easily be confused with a number of other species. But generally, the thing you're going to look for, so all of these markings look significant. When you compare this to the other 2, they're not. Where you want to be looking on this one, these 3 species, is right here in this part of the forewing when it's closed. And oh, by the way, just because it has long tails, again, a lot of times they're cut off or they're off and you don't notice it. It might look like a completely different butterfly. So this one you'll notice has a brown patch that goes from the tip of the forewing or the leading edge of the forewing all the way through here continuously. Okay. There's a pale patch here, but this is not broken up. It's continuous through this area. So that's the long-tailed skipper. Okay. When we look at the Durant's or Durante's skipper, what happens is, again, similar. We're going to compare them. Again, records all over San Antonio area, in the Bernie area, up all the way up into Austin. But again, mostly fall records, fall, early winter records. This one, the brown patch is actually interrupted. So there's some brown here, there's brown here, but notice this patch of grayish or brown, it breaks it up and breaks it up. So there's an interruption of that brown patch. You can see it here, it's a little harder, but notice that little strip of grayish white interrupts that brown patch that would have flowed right through here. So the spots, these spot patterns really aren't that helpful. You really got to look at the forewing. Thus, again, photographs are really, really good. Or when you see these, knowing that to look in the forewing when the wings are folded, and that's mostly what they are when they're flying or feeding and flying around. Keep those things in mind. Here's a comparison again. Notice on the Durant's or Durantes, you have the interrupted brown streak right here. This one is a continuous streak all the way through here. Otherwise, if you look at these patterns here and these patterns here, there's a lot of overlap. There's overlap with the spot patterns here and up in here. And so they're not super reliable, I don't think, in terms of identification. So I'm going to look for that interrupted brown patch. Then we have a third species called the brown longtail. Again, it has a spot pattern similar to the other 2 here, but notice that on the forewing, there's a little bit of hint of brown here, but really not very prominent, not easily seen. And when the wings are folded, even though there's some exception, when the wings are open, excuse me, it is definitely a brown, beautiful brown, rich brown color to the upper surface of the wings, the dorsal surface. It will have those spots right here. And sometimes there's a little bit of a hint here because down in far South Texas, there's a 4th species, at least, called the Teleus longtail or Teleus skipper. That looks very similar to this guy, but generally that's not one we need to worry about up here. So these are the 3 that we should compare. So let's look at the Durant's versus the brown. Again, these patterns here really are similar. But you've got this big brown patch here, you've got this interrupted area here, and here you really just don't have anything super distinct, a little tiny bit of darker brown, but generally nothing that dramatic there. And if we compare the brown to the long-tailed skipper, it's even more dramatic with this dark brown patch through the forewing and only a hint of a little bit of brown here. And again, the spotting, even though it can be variable, is far less, the glassy spots are far less noticeable than on the previous two, the species in the previous one. All right, so those are the long wing skipper or the long-tailed skippers that I wanted to cover that can be in our area. I want to now move to some that are even a little bit less common, dramatically beautiful. Certainly we should watch out for them because they have been documented in our area. I'm going to start with this really big skipper, open wing skipper called the hermit skipper. There have been a number of records in our area, very few. This was one that I photographed in my yard on November 6th, 4 years ago. The host plant is Jopoi. I have no idea what that is, but I'm thinking that's a South Texas plant. But the hermit skipper is large, has these brown, prominent brown patches with this beautiful gold, rich gold brown pattern. Has kind of a squared off forewing right here that bends down and curves. This one, when it flew into my yard, this is my record right here. This flew into my yard and landed right in front of me. And I was like, oh my gosh, this was the biggest open wing skipper I'd ever seen in my life. And it was dramatic. It was here for a couple of days. I was really thrilled to see this particular skipper. So this is one that's not going to be common, but when you see it, you're going to know it because of the size of this thing. And again, watch for those hook tips on the antenna. The next one to share with you, and this is a photograph I got of one from an iNaturalist user right here, so I want to give credit. This is the Maison scallop wing. And you notice the wings are kind of indented along the way, kind of scalloped, if you will. Very few spots here, a couple up here. Small butterfly, very few records. It's mostly going to be to the south of us and the east. But you can see there are a few records, including one by New Braunfels, a few down in the South San Antonio area. So keep your eyes open for this little tiny butterfly. You never know. This may be one that is underrepresented. Notice its host plants are lamb's quarters and pigweeds, most of which are non-native. There's got to be more hosts than these guys right here. So this is one. Again, of the ones I'm showing you right now, maybe the most unreported of this little group of brown ones. The next one is a sickle wing skipper. Prickly ash is its host plant, so it certainly could be in this area. There have been records of this one. It's more common down in the RGV, the Rio Grande Valley. We have not documented one at Guadalupe, I don't believe. But you'll notice they're all around us, so there's no reason it couldn't happen. Here's one out west of Kerrville, out here towards Junction, Campwood, this area, Uvalde. So it can be scattered even out here and up in this area, but then mostly of the time you're going to see these in deep South Texas. But this has a really unique pattern. This little curvature right here, plus that tip, that falcate tip right there, or sickle wing tip, is going to be very characteristic, and it just has an interesting pattern of browns and grays and markings and various things like that make it pretty unique. When you see it, you'll know that it's not something you're normally going to see, and this is the sickle wing skipper. So keep an eye again open for this one. Then we have the brown banded skipper. I photographed this originally. This one I got down the valley, but the first one I ever saw was actually on the Guadalupe River outside of Waring, Texas, back in 2006. Clearly a lifer. You'll notice most of the records are down in the valley. They're being seen right now at the National Butterfly Center, by the way. But very few records up here, so don't expect this one. But again, it might surprise you. If you're super lucky. Another one is Barbados cherry, which is not native, so it's going to be limited based on where this plant is being planted, and probably most of these are going to be moving up from the Rio Grande Valley, as this one was probably likely done. But this one is much smaller than the hermit. It still has those little patches of dark and brown lines going through here. Really dramatically pretty little skipper. but much smaller than the hermit and even more uncommon based on INAT records. Butterfly that I keep thinking we ought to see more of around here is this guy right here, the common sooty wing. This is a small open wing skipper that a lot of times perches with its wings half open. So it can be very dark, almost black, with these dramatic little white spots. And you can see it almost looks like the Big Dipper right through here. It's missing a couple of stars, but similar. Um, it feeds on pigweeds, which again, we don't have a lot of, but you can see it's been seen down in the San Antonio area. But when you get north of Highway 46, it's very, very rare. I don't know if this is just overlooked. If you go down the Rio Grande Valley, it's much more common. If you go west, it's much more common. If you go north, it's much more common. But it seems like we have a kind of a hole up in this area. But again, worth looking for. One of our darkest skippers that we have, almost purplish underneath. So it's something to keep an eye open for. Then we have this guy, and I wasn't even going to include this skipper. I saw this up in Minnesota. It's a dramatically large skipper with this big white patch that extends from the hind wing to the floor, all the way through the hind wing, I should say. And when the wings are open, you see these big orange glassy spots. Really beautiful, large butterfly. You'll notice it's mostly up here. However, on May 5th, 2026, it was documented in the Riverside Nature Center in Kerrville. So if it's one here and there are a whole bunch are over here, where are they in this area? So let's keep our eyes open for this. This really is a northern or an eastern butterfly. But that said, one was found in Riverside at Riverside Nature Center, so with a good photograph. So it definitely was it. But again, of these butterflies, this may indeed be the rarest one that we have. We only have one more butterfly to talk about tonight, and it's one that is part of the large skippers that feed primarily on yuccas. And the one in our area primarily is the Strecker's giant skipper. Up until 2 years ago, I'd never seen one of these guys anywhere. And then when I was still working, we were at a BioBlitz at ABK, Konkroski State Park or Wildlife Naturally or whatever they're calling it, out west of Bernie. And we were doing a survey, and all of a sudden, this big, huge day flying thing that I thought was a moth came zooming by us, and then all of a sudden landed on the ground. And this is the photograph of this guy right here. At first, I just thought it was a large moth, and then I saw the tips on the wings or on the antenna, and realized I was looking at something I'd never seen before. And indeed, it turned out to be the Strecker's giant skipper. Then the next spring, I saw one at Guadalupe at the end of a survey when everybody else had left. I got this picture or a picture. I thought, oh, nobody's going to believe me on that. So fortunately, I did get pictures. And then this spring, we had one fly in front of the entire group, and everybody recorded pictures of the Strecker's giant skipper. So again, you'll notice that it has a very scattered distribution. It only flies for a very short period of time in the spring. There are other giant skippers. There's really probably only one that's in our area, but it does not have all of these distinct yellowish orange glassy marks all over the wing. So this is very dramatic, very characteristic in terms of you're not going to confuse this with any of our other skippers. And again, a large skipper with a dramatic flight pattern. So again, one to watch for. Not anymore. Chances are they're already gone I'll guarantee you they're probably gone for the year. And we won't see these adults until this next March and April is when we should look for them. So that concludes all the butterflies we're going to talk about tonight. I know I probably talked too fast. Then I'm happy. It's a little bit after 8, so I don't want to keep anybody any longer than you want to be here. I do want to mention that our final training will be Monday, July 6th on the closed-winged or grass skippers. That'll be another probably hour-long presentation. There's a lot of them to get through. And then upcoming GRSP surveys, Friday, June 5th, 10 a.m. And then Saturday, June 20th, will be our NABA circle for Guadalupe River State Park, which includes counting over. So basically, that circle extends over to 281 in Bulverde, Spring Branch, and then it extends from Guadalupe to the west over to Cordillera, that housing development there, and then a little bit north of there towards Candelia, and then south a little bit as well. So if any of you want to participate in that, that one we start at 10 or 11. We're going to start that at 8 because it is potentially a day-long count. We have multiple areas to go to. I will try to get us permission to get into Honey Creek to survey there. We have the Bower unit that we can survey as well, which is on the north side of the river, which we typically don't do in our regular GRSP surveys, and then other areas outside and around the park. So again, we'd love to have as many people participate in that one as possible. There is a $3 fee, I think, if we're going to include the report in the NABA final year-end report. So that's all I've got. I'm going to stop sharing. If anybody has questions, Robert, I'm happy to try to answer those. I see there's a lot of comments, so there might be some questions. I don't know. I don't know if you've been monitoring that at all, or if people are just sharing email addresses. Or
Yeah, I
whatever.
think folks were chiming in as you were going through there. I thought the interesting one that Patsy mentioned is the Wells Tell. Is what it looks like to her. And I'm drawing a blank on the name of it. I see it in my
Oh, is
head.
that the lot? Was that the Laviana?
I believe so.
Yeah, that
Patsy,
that
I think
mark on
that's,
that's actually a good description. I kind of like that whale's tail. Lawn
yeah,
darts. That's what I
it,
was referring to as lawn darts.
yes.
Yeah, whale's tail. There you go. Patsy, that's a good term too to think about. Samara fruit seeds. Yeah, there you go. Okay. And you can see they've seen them at Confluence Park, Government Canyon, and Bandera. So they can be recorded. It's just a matter of keeping our eyes open, and we get used to seeing the common things, and sometimes we miss the rarities that show up. So it's always good to keep that in mind. And Darlene Vargas got a Maisons at Landa Park. So again, they're in the area. Um, oh, wait, look at this. Silver spotted skipper. Oh, Club Woods north of Houston. Okay. Well, that I can believe. Find me one in Bernie, and then we'll talk. Uh, so anyway,
Oh,
but I don't see a lot of questions there. So,
yeah.
um, uh, Robert, if you're catching any emails that you need to send me to add to the our survey list, please do that. And again, I
Sure.
hope everybody enjoyed this and got something out of it. Robert, you'll share. Well, go ahead and tell us what you'll do
Yeah,
from here.
yeah. So, yeah. Well, thank you again, as always, Craig. I mean, I feel like we're all sponges, just soaking up as much as we can, and it's awesome when folks chime in, where they're spotting things. It kind of creates that excitement of, okay, now we've got to find it ourselves. So the folks that dropped their email address in the chat tonight, you are on the list now, and so we will send that out. Like I said at the beginning of the meeting tonight. We'll send that out tomorrow as soon as we have the link, and then you can watch previous recordings as well. And so, um, if you didn't get those emails, again, drop your email address there. We'll make sure you get added to the list. And so, thank you again for the Alamo Area chapter for providing this platform for us to, and Jeanette graciously showing up before the start of every meeting and getting
Yes.
us going. So thank you all, and hopefully we'll see you on Friday out in the field.
Thank you, Robert. And Robert, you and I'll sit down. We'll set up a meeting to talk about